So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kathleen Smith. I'm the coordinator of the Toronto Mensa Inquiring Minds program, and I warmly welcome you to this Zoom edition of Inquiring Minds. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Bruno Lyra. In 2016, Bruno stepped away from a very promising career as a corporate lawyer, where he had been very involved with, among other things, working with the entertainment industry. And he decided to pursue his passion for films by getting into that industry himself. Initially, he enrolled in the Toronto Film School, where he graduated first in a class of 200 students and was chosen as the valedictorian. So a great start. Since then, he has been on the staff there teaching film-related courses, including a course on copyright and contracts in film, which is a major area of interest for him, intellectual property. Meanwhile, Mr. Lyra became one of the executive producers of a feature film, The Sounding, and I sent everybody the link to it yesterday in case you happen to have had a chance to look at it, which was shown in 2017 at the CineQuest Film Festival and was subsequently sold to HBO and released to the public at the start of the pandemic. Bruno is a producer on an ongoing series called First Person, which is based on what used to be called the Facts and Arguments column in the Globe and Mail newspaper. And that has been screened at TIFF and at Cannes. Furthermore, Bruno is a screenwriter, and he has recently sold one of his feature film projects to an established production company with financing from Telefilm. And he has signed a deal with Blue Ant Mediator for the TV show called Identities. So in a very short time, he has really established his foothold in the film industry. Today, Bruno will give us a presentation on using intellectual property for storytelling, lessons for film, art, and beyond. So welcome, Bruno Lyra.
Thank you very much. And thank you for that introduction. And thank you for everybody who's here. My voice might not be what it usually is. I'm recovering from a bit of a cold. And I was just mentioning to Kathleen that one of the positive elements of being able to do this virtually is that we can safely have this event, even though I'm a little bit under the weather. So it's a pleasure to have everyone here. Regarding the issue of this being film, art, and beyond, a quick introduction, although it will be focused mainly in the arts. One of the comments I like to make to preface any presentation is that, in my mind, persuasion is at the heart of really any activity, any business activity, certainly any professional activity, but certainly any business activity. And persuasion, there are really two types of persuasion. There's intellectual persuasion and there's emotional persuasion. Intellectual persuasion is numbers. You're giving people graphs and you're indicating how certain things will work. But the most effective form of persuasion has the intellectual component and has the emotional component. And there's no better way to persuade anyone than through storytelling. So that is my initial spiel on why this goes certainly beyond certain elements of the art. But if we're focusing on the arts, let me just jump in and share my slides with all of you. And just want to make sure everything's going to work perfectly. So when we talk about storytelling, there are the main challenges that people face for a career in the arts, or really to engage with their audience. It's basically twofold, but as we'll discuss, they come from the same source. It's access to gatekeepers and the amount of options for end consumer. Really, the commonplace is that we are in an overcrowded marketplace for storytelling. Gatekeepers, agents, producers, anyone who acts as a gatekeeper for the creative industries is flooded with requests. And that's sort of a consequence of two different elements. First, storytelling is seen as an intuitive activity. Most people think that because they can tell stories to their loved ones, to their co-workers, that that naturally translate into the ability to be a storyteller professionally. That's not the case, but that's a discussion for another time. And when you combine that with the technological means to connect with gatekeepers, to submit your work to gatekeepers, to get in touch with gatekeepers through Twitter, LinkedIn, any other social media platform, their general email, which if you're good at Google searching it, you can pretty much figure out anyone's email. Gatekeepers are flooded with requests with stories, which means it becomes all the more harder to find a diamond in the rough. And as a result, it's also harder for good storytellers that haven't established themselves in the industry to stand out. The flip side to that, or the other side to that, is the amount of options for end consumers. Now, all of us here probably have a plethora of different entertainment options where we watch films, television shows. We subscribe to Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime. And every other week you have a new streaming service coming up. And one thing I always tell students and filmmakers that I'm training or somehow addressing is when we're talking about the competition, the options for end consumers, you can't just think of the medium you're in. You have to think of all the other elements that are vying for their attention, that are demanding their attention. And that includes TikTok. That includes the fact that all of us have, a smartphone that allows us to access all the mysteries of the universe. And you can find yourself at 3 a.m. trying to understand, how Kleenex are manufactured, or whatever it is that piques your interest. Hopefully, something more interesting than that. But at the end of the day, we can all have access to those pieces of information, and the practical result of that is precisely what's pointed out in the slide. We have a declining attention span. We have a diminished level of engagement. There's a study by Nielsen indicating that more than 50% of Americans, and this is from 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I might be getting one of the details wrong about the study, but the substance of it is that more than 50% of the individuals interviewed confirmed that they were always or very often with a second screen while they were watching television. They either had their phone with them, a laptop, an iPad, something else while they were watching content, which obviously changes the way you engage with the content. So if we were to boil that down and say, what is the problem that we have? We have an issue of engagement with the audience. And that happens, again, in the arts, that happens in cinema, that happens in television, that happens in the literary world, but that also happens in our day-to-day life.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Of course, go right ahead.
Can you click on the part where it says play from the start? And because right now I can see all your slide deck.
I can just do this.
That's fine. That's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. I'm sorry, I got lost for a moment engaging with your art. So basically, all that to say that there are two variables within your control. Maximizing the quality of your project and maximizing the appeal of your project. Now, those two things might sound synonymous, obviously, and to a degree, they are interconnected, meaning a good project is a more appealing project. But I'd like us to look beyond that. I'd like us to consider that when we're talking about maximizing the appeal of your project, we're taking into consideration the fact that And I just want to make sure for some reason, after making that change, I'm not able to, okay. For some reason, it stopped here, but we'll address that at a later moment. If we go back to the main modern challenges of storytelling, the issue with maximizing the appeal of your project means, how do you fight this lack of engagement? How do you counterattack this lack of engagement? And I would I would present as a point of discussion that an efficient way to do so is to rely on intellectual property. Now, general disclaimer, this is not legal advice. This is not a legal consultation of any sort. This is a conversation between a filmmaker, a storyteller, and an audience, and a conversation at that. Nothing technical about it from a legal perspective. But having said that, there are three key approaches that I think are useful: weaving factual elements into your fictional story, public domain stories and characters, and fair use, fair dealing. To give you a short introduction to what I'm talking about, what is intellectual property? Intellectual property refers to a form of intangible intellectual creation. It covers any type of intellectual creation. And there are specific subtypes. And the one that's most relevant for our conversation today is something called copyright. Copyright is the type of intellectual property that refers to works of art. Copyright is the field of intellectual property that covers artistic, creative works. And copyright is actually pretty stringent, pretty strict, meaning if somebody holds a copyright to a specific work, you are unable to really do anything with that specific work, the holder of the copyright. And there are aspects of public domain, and we'll talk about fair use later, but in a broad general comment, the person who controls the copyright over a work gets to control what happens to that work in a nearly complete manner. However, as I mentioned a moment ago, copyright refers to works of art, creative works, which means that facts and events, things that actually happened, aren't protected by copyright. And when you combine that with the principle of freedom of speech that we all enjoy, the result is that you can talk about things that actually happen. You can include those in your storytelling. Now, I want to be clear, there are some legal restrictions, there are risks of defamation, and there are other things, but if we were to get into that, we basically spend another 5 hours in this point of the lecture alone. So and I'll include the caveat that this is a gross summary of all the elements. But basically, if something is undisputedly true, and it's a public event, something that is known to the general public, that is, in a non-technical sense, fair game. That is something you can include in your story. And why is weaving factual elements into your story so important? There are several benefits. And before I get into the exact benefits, I just want to say what I'm talking about here is not the idea of making something that is a biopic that is based on a completely true event. Those are great projects, but not what I'm referring to here. I'm referring to the possibility of telling a fictional story that has as its backdrop, or that has elements of real life events which will improve the storytelling. And I'm going to start with a very simple example, and with the simplest benefit, which is economy. If I were to say the number one problem with scripts and with storytelling in general is the fact that they provide too much explanation, that there are complex setups. People spend there's too much exposition basically in the story, and information is the death of emotion. You don't want to spoon feed information to your audience. You want them to have feelings. Now, a certain degree of information is necessary for there to be a plot and for them to be engaged, but you'd like to deliver that in the most seamless way possible, and not with very clear over exposition or exposition of any type and over complicated setups. And there's really no better way to do that than relying on information your audience already has. And I'm going to start with a very rudimentary example. This isn't a refined example, but I wanted to get a film that most people would have seen. And at the same time, something that allowed us to sort of build on to more complicated case studies. And that is Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a film I'm assuming everybody has at some point, even if many years ago, seen the first Indiana Jones film. And in that film, the project starts, the story starts with an action scene in which we don't really know the plot, but we get, a shot of adrenaline with Indiana Jones in a complex action scene. And immediately, that's really the cold open of the story. But we immediately move to him at his university, teaching a class, and then being taken away by a colleague to meet with, and this is where the story really starts, with these governmental agents, essentially CIA agents. In the story, it's a little bit more covert exactly what agency they're representing, but let's just call them CIA agents. And these CIA agents are about to pretty much explain the whole plot of the film. And this is a complex, convoluted plot, which involves the lost city of Tanis, the staff of Ra, all these mythical stories. Which means you're delivering a whole lot of information for the audience, and it would be very easy for an audience member to get lost in that story, particularly if you imagine Raiders of the Lost Ark being told in 2022 with the diminished engagement that we've already brought up. So what does the screenwriter, the producers, Steven Spielberg all do in this film, which is genius? One of the first things that is mentioned to the character of Indiana Jones by the CIA agents is the Nazis are after the Ark. Now, why is that so important? Because as an audience member, I don't need you to explain who the Nazis are. I don't need you to explain why they're bad. I don't even really need you to explain what the Ark will do, because I know that the Nazi forces are so evil that whatever they're trying to obtain from the Ark is not going to be good for the rest of the world. I don't need to explain Indiana Jones's motivation. I don't need to explain that he was, as a child, has something against the Nazi, because everyone has, rightfully so, and certainly should have very strong feelings against the Nazis. So we understand why our hero is going to be so invested in defending the Ark against the Nazi forces. And they do all that by simply saying the Nazi forces are going after the Ark. And that's all they need to do. And then they can flourish it with the history, with the biblical elements, and all the other historical, religious, and at times fictional, completely fictional elements that are added to it. But the audience, as of that moment, understands the objective of the lead character. And they did that, again, by relying on information the audience already had. And not only do you have the benefits of economy, but now you can sprinkle other elements of in this case, historical value that the audience already has. One of the immediate next scenes is Gestapo agents going after the character who will be the love interest of Indiana Jones. Now, the mere reference of Gestapo already allows the audience to understand what's going on. You don't need to explain that the Gestapo is linked to the threat that was explained moments ago, because they're juxtaposing the story to these factual elements. And again, you're benefiting from economy. You don't need to have a character saying, well, the Gestapo, and then explaining what they are. You can just rely on the fact that the audience will understand that and will get caught up in the emotion of the scene and not lost trying to understand each step of the way. But you're still providing a lot of rich information. I just wanted to check any comments so far, any questions so far, anything anyone wants to ask. And I'm going to stop sharing so I can get a better look of everyone.
Okay, so Liz Blight had answered my previous question.
Oh, okay.
About her favorite film. So
okay.
she's mentioning that her favorite film is A Christmas Carol with Alastair Sim.
Fantastic. So I'll try to there's an example I have in mind that maybe we can address. I'm trying to think how I can work it in, but I just wanted to check in with everybody and make sure that we weren't overlooking any questions. Let me jump back to the slides. Okay. The second example I wanted to bring on this specific item of economy is a much more recent film but that I'm assuming a lot of you might have seen. It's Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Now, this is a film that has, it hinges, it depends, it relies on rhythm. The story of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the film is outstanding, but the story is very simple. And really the enjoyability of the project relies on the fact that you're going to watch Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt interact with each other and with these very unique characters that they find along the way. And the plot becomes secondary. Now, in order for you to have to be able to have that perfectly paced rhythm of the film, in addition to having a genius director like Quentin Tarantino, the second thing you need is not have to present your audience with too much information, not have to overload them with information. And again, Quentin Tarantino does that in a genius manner by relying on facts we already know. When Charles Manson shows up in the film, you don't need to explain to the audience who Charles Manson is. You don't need to explain to the audience what will happen later on. The audience already knows that. And therefore, that sense, that feeling of risk, that overlaying feeling of risk that exists throughout the film is presented to the audience without having to explain at any point what's going to happen. They are, again, relying on what the audience already knows, and that allows for that rhythm that the film has. Or again, that and Quentin Tarantino's genius, which in no small part contributes to the result. But without relying on information the audience had, he would have had to explain those elements. And he sidestepped that by relying on information the audience already had. Now, there's a point I want to make here, which is maybe one of the most important points in terms of what can be taken away for different industries. If I were to pitch any of you a story about a leader of a cult who convinced his, her, their followers to commit horrific crimes, certainly illegal acts and horrific crimes at his command, you would say, Bruno, I need a backstory. I need to understand how this person convinced these individuals to do this. You would need a 5-episode series of, backstory of how charming this individual is, of how charismatic he is, of, what trauma these individuals had in their lives that allowed them to be influenced by this individual. And you need that explanation, because since I'm telling you a fictional story, in order to buy in the whole discussion about suspension of disbelief requires you to ask questions of why and how. Now, when we're talking about factual events, when we're talking about things that happen, we sort of release ourselves from this need of suspension of disbelief because we know the thing actually happened. So if this were a fictional story and I were to say these young individuals who are young, intelligent, physically capable, are out and about in life, are going to be convinced by this man to commit this horrific crime, you'd say, how can he possibly do this? Is he a genius? Does he have some sort of mental hold on them? Is he leveraging a secret about their lives? But because Quentin Tarantino, again, geniusly, this doesn't take away from his genius, it only adds to it, relied on facts and events we already know. When the troupe arrives at the house at the end of the film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, we don't need an explanation on how Charles Manson convinced them to do that. When Brad Pitt goes to the ranch and he meets all the followers, we don't need the explanation of why and how. We just buy into it because we know it's true, or at least it's the truth that's become commonplace in our culture. It's the story that we've heard a number of times and through a number of films. And you can only really achieve that by basing your story on existing factual events. And again, this lesson is something that applies to any form of art. We buy into things, we believe things that actually happen, even if they seem absurd, but we're extremely skeptical about fictional stories. I'm sure all of you have either done this yourself or having been with somebody who did that. You're watching a fictional story and they say, that would never happen. Now I'm out of the story because that would never happen. That person would never be able to do that. Again, we know that reality at times is more fantastical than fiction. And if you can find an example, if you can find something that actually happened, that's where you bring your audience in. That's where you convince them to stay in the story, not ask as many questions while still remaining an intelligent, engaged viewer. as long as they know that happened in real life. One last example about economy. This can be used for character development. Now, many of you might remember the film Castaway with Tom Hanks, a phenomenal performance by Tom Hanks in a film directed by Robert Zemeckis. Now, that film is sort of a rush to everyone who walked into the theater to watch that film when it was released knew that Tom Hanks was going to end up on an island all alone. And that was what the audience was expecting. The problem is you can't really just release him onto the island from a storytelling perspective, because you need to explain to the audience who this man is, why they should care about him, why he's relevant. But you also need to do that in a short amount of time. You need to explain who this character is, but you can't take 45 minutes to do so because, again, Kathleen, who walked into the theater to watch this movie, is expecting to see Tom Hanks alone in the island trying to survive against the elements, which means her patience, and Kathleen might be the exception, but the average viewer will only take so much of backstory if they walked into a film called Castaway. The way they did that was saying, this is the guy who handles logistics for FedEx. They didn't need to explain anything else. They needed to show one scene of him timing a number of FedEx employees. And remember, this is, circa 20 years ago. So Amazon wasn't really the reference of delivery overnight. FedEx represented that. And by having that representation, if this is the guy who keeps FedEx on track, this is the person who has everything scheduled to the second. His life is about order. His life is about meeting specific expectations. We know so much about the character simply from connecting him to a well-known trademark, which is a bit of a cheat because it's not actual factual elements, it's trademark. But the point here being, by relying on things that exist outside of the storytelling world, I've just conveyed, not me, but people who are much more talented than I, have just managed to convey all this information about the character without spending nearly any time at all. They've just delivered the information to you in a very quick, dynamic scene in which you see a package being thrown around, and finally you see that recognizable Tom Hanks face, and you know everything you need to know about that specific character. Again, all this leading to economy. Let's talk about another benefit, because I've talked enough about economy, and let's move forward. Second benefit of weaving factual elements into your screenplay, the benefit of emotional connection. Now, there's an academic example I wanted to use for this, and I'll jump out of the slides just for a second. I also want to check So I'll address, I saw a longer question, but I think that one can be addressed later in the presentation. So regarding the emotional content, I read a lot of scripts from younger filmmakers, and there's a variety of scripts and stories that refer to the loss of an idol, a musical idol, an artist that they admire, and that is very commonly the starting point, the inciting incident, if you will, of the story that these individuals are telling. The problem with most of these scripts is they are creating a fictional idol, musical idol, artistic idol, and you take a lot of time to do that. The academic example I explained is, let's say your story starts in early 1980s New York City, and we see a bus driving into town, and there's a young person, and let's say a young man, age 16. He's maybe even a little younger than that, 15, 14. He's arriving alone at the city. Clearly, he's overwhelmed. It's not a place he's been to many times in his life, and certainly not alone. He walks out of the bus, and he starts making his way to the Upper West Side, 77th Street to be precise, I think, if my memory serves me. And he has this album under his arm that he's holding on to very firmly. He doesn't want to drop it. And he's nervous, he's excited. Finally, he makes his way across the street from the Dakota building, the iconic Dakota building in New York. And there are other groups of people, and we sort of see him as the credits roll by. We see him sort of, chatting with some of the other people that are there, but we don't really hear what's being said. And hours go by, and he's tired. but he's still standing on that street corner late at night. And finally, a limo stops right in front of the Dakota building. And we see our character's face light up. And John Lennon walks out of that limo. And we now realize that what he's holding is a Beatles record. And as he lifts his leg and decides to step onto the asphalt to cross the street, he's going to get an autograph. That's now we understand why he's in New York, why he went there. We hear shots being fired. And John Lennon has now just been killed in front of our young character, who we've now just been revealed what his ultimate purpose at that location was. That is not that my storytelling is at all efficient. This is a silly story that I just told, but the fact that I am relying on the real life story adds a whole new layer of emotional content to that narrative. Why? Well, first, there's the obvious matter of we know that that was an actual man who passed away. That already adds stakes to the story. Second thing, that was I don't mean to presume anybody's musical taste, but all of us have been, or most of us have been somehow influenced by the Beatles. Either you love their music, or somebody in your life loved their music, or you've met somebody throughout your life that was a Beatles fan. It's very rare to not have that throughout your life's history. And being able to reach that point or being able to rely on those elements can be immensely impactful. Now, in addition to that, maybe you're a Beatles super fan and you actually know that John Lennon was just stopping by his apartment to kiss his son goodnight, and he was going to go out again. So the only reason he was there was because after working during the day, he wanted to stop by and kiss his son goodnight, which adds a whole new level of tragedy and emotional content to that story. Maybe you know somebody, or you remember either yourself or somebody you remember hearing the news of John Lennon's death. Maybe if you were alive at that time, you remember hearing it. If you weren't, maybe you remember an older sibling, your parents mentioning that, which means your audience member is suddenly flooded with emotion that has not a direct connection to what you're telling them, but you're piggybacking off those pre-existing emotions. And that is immensely important in storytelling. Your audience already has information in them. And this is actually the connection between this benefit and economy. In both cases, you're relying on either information or emotional content your audience already has. You're relying on things that are already in your audience's psyche. And as a result, you want to really make sure you're leaning into that. So hopefully that example made sense. Again, let me know, and just checking, we have 2 questions. And if at any moment somebody wants me to repeat something, the other questions, Elka mentioned these examples are very cultural specific. Very good point. I don't mean to say that these examples should be used by everyone. Each person should find the examples that they think will communicate best with their target audience. And of course, that should change throughout time and space. These are merely examples of what was done to address a specific audience, which should not be seen as a solution for each and every case, but merely an example to illustrate what can be done. So, we can address that in further detail as we move along. Let me go back to the slides. So manipulate expectations, another benefit to be taken into consideration. So, whether we're talking about Titanic, 6 Degrees of Separation, and Glorious Bastards, when you're weaving factual elements into your story, your audience has a specific expectation of what will happen. In Titanic, of course, we know what's going to happen to that ship, which means that love story is to a degree doomed, even though we don't need anybody to actually spell it out. That is something every audience member is coming in with that expectation. In 6 Degrees of Separation, you're playing off what the character played by Will Smith in that film lies about his father being Sidney Poitier to Stockard Channing and Donald Sutherland's characters in that film. And we as the audience are projecting what that representation or misrepresentation in that specific case would lead that specific audience member to react to. In Inglourious Bastards, when Quentin Tarantino again says, well, we're at the end of that story, we're going to kill Hitler in a completely different scenario. You're again playing with the expectations. When you see that the Brad Pitt squadron of soldiers coming in, historically, you know that Hitler doesn't die in those circumstances. So when you're presented with that fact, you're certain their mission is going to fail, because there's no way, this is a given, general historical elements, and as a result, you're sure that's not going to happen. What the transfer from that specific example is, well, let's subvert those expectations. So when I say manipulate, I'm either saying leaning on those expectations, such as Titanic, playing with those expectations, such as 6 Degrees of Separation, or completely subverting those expectations, as happened in Inglourious Bastards. Let me take a look before we move on to the next example. Well, I'll just mention this specifically. In order for these factual elements, the weaving of these factual elements to actually yield results, this actually hinges on one requirement: texture. In order for your audience to buy that these things actually happen, it should have the feel, appearance, and consistency that it would in the factual world. And in order to give that consistency, that texture, the one step that many writers don't do, and that it's absolutely, or storytellers don't do, is copious amounts of research. If you're talking about a small town in a specific region, research that small town to the full extent of your resources. Go into Google Street View and explore the town. Call local businesses or reach out to local businesses and talk to them. If there's a town hall meeting, ask if you can attend and just observe. Use any instruments you have to get these aspects of texture that can contribute to the overall storytelling. Now, the reason you're going to do this, it provides a degree of specificity, purpose, and realism, which again would be immensely difficult to rival in an independent creation. And two examples of that, there's a great Spike Lee film called Summer of Sam, which tells the story of New York City and the surrounding areas during the period of the Son of Sam crime spree that happened. The story is, my personal interpretation, it's not at all about the Son of Sam killer. It's about the people around that story. The story of the Son of Sam killer is merely the backdrop for a genius filmmaker such as Spike Lee to tell the story about his characters. But again, it creates specificity, it creates purpose, it creates a sense of realism, even though the stories that are being told are fictional, because the backdrop is real. The audiences can connect to that story in a more direct manner. And that is the case even if ultimately and intentionally you subvert those expectations. Queen's Gambit is a fictional story, but that linked itself at several moments to the story of Bobby Fischer. Again, because it provides realism for the audience, it provides this level of texture for the audience. And last but not least, this is a huge opportunity for you to get more ideas. And there's a great example from a show called West Wing, which is a bit on the older side, but the reason I like to use it as an example, it was not the first, but it was what propelled a very famous screenwriter called Aaron Sorkin, who has since won several Academy Awards, to extreme prominence. And for those who don't know, it told the story of the American president and the White House senior staff who assisted him in those political endeavors. And within this story, there's a specific scene in which Aaron Sorkin was writing. And in his research, he found that the presidential security team, the cars that are escorting the president, need to leave as of the moment the president enters the car. It doesn't matter what else is happening, but as a security measure, when the president enters the car, that brigade needs to leave immediately. And that was a minor element for a scene he was writing. in which the president was leaving a musical presentation and was getting into the car. And by doing the research, he figured that out and included that little detail in the scene. But more importantly, later in the show, that idea led to a 3-episode or 2-episode arc in which they're campaigning in a rural part of the country. The president walks into the car. All the cars leave immediately, again because of the security measure, and 3 of his senior staff members are left behind in farmland essentially, and are stuck there because at the time there weren't Ubers, but there were no cabs. There's no means of transportation other than the presidential brigade, and as a result they are stuck there. So the fact that this can provide additional ideas for storytelling is immensely valuable, and it all goes back to the idea of doing copious amounts of research. Let me just check in and see how we're doing. Question 1 is okay. So I think we'll address all those questions later. Let me jump back. Okay, another element that I wanted to talk about. Copyright protection isn't meant to last forever. As I mentioned earlier, copyright is this protection of creative works, but the whole idea behind it is that creators should be able to benefit from their works, but that ultimately that work should serve society at large, and there shouldn't be a restriction to the use of that work. Now, there are a number of discussions there, but essentially, copyright only lasts for a specific amount of time. Currently, the rules in Canada, life of the author plus 50 years. In the US, there are 2 sets of rules. There's life of the author plus 70 years or 95 years after publication if it's a work for hire. We don't need to get into the intricacies of the rules, but basically, after a certain amount of time, a work goes into the public domain, and that includes classical literature, folklore, mythology, and there are many, many, many successful cases in which these elements of public domain were used. And most at Disney animated classics, every Shakespearean adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and all these works were based, and this is a distinction between source material and new creation. The new creation is still protected by copyright, but the core of the source material, or the source material itself, is in the public domain. Why is this so valuable? And I'm going to address that by mentioning a specific case study, because of my legal background, I love case studies, and I think it usually lends itself to a fruitful discussion. So the example is a film called Snow White and the Huntsman that came out circa 10 years ago, and it basically was a retelling of the story of Snow White. It starred Charlize Theron, Kristen Stewart, and Chris Hemsworth, Thor, from the Marvel films. This was the reason I chose this. There were basically 3 reasons I wanted to raise this point. First, it was a very successful adaptation. The script sold for a reported $3.2 million. The film generated nearly $400 million at the global box office. The writer of this story was an unproduced screenwriter. He had written this script apparently based on articles all the way back in 8 years before the film was actually made, and had a difficult process getting that to the screen. And he went on to have a prolific career. And the reason I bring that up is this wasn't just a interesting idea he came up with. This person had talent. He went on to write big movies like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies, a film with Robert De Niro and John Travolta, a hunting thriller with those 2 iconic actors. So somebody who clearly had storytelling abilities, but I want to focus on the value of this specific idea he had. And the reason for that is he relied on public domain elements. He took the story of Snow White, the original 1812 Brothers Grimm story, and avoided incremental additions of originality in the derivative works. What do I mean by that? Things that go into the public domain that means the original work goes into the public domain. But when somebody makes a new work, relying on that original work, if they add something new, that new thing becomes protected by copyright. So, the original Brothers Grimm story, public domain, but Disney makes an animation, which we've all watched throughout, or most of us have watched throughout our lives, and includes a new element, includes a new character. That new character is going to be protected by copyright, or at least there's going to be good arguments to say that that element is protected by copyright. And that is essentially what this screenwriter managed to sidestep. He managed to tell the story relying only on the original elements of the story and sidestepping everything that had been created in the multiple iterations that were made at a later time without those elements. In addition to doing that, in addition to relying on public domain elements, he provided a new perspective. The initial pitch for this story was that he was going to tell the story from the huntsman's perspective. Now, that changed during development, and with the film's release, it certainly wasn't that. And there are arguments to say that that wouldn't be a good idea nowadays, but the idea of providing a new perspective to a story that's been heard a number of times before is certainly something that is valuable and can be valuable for from a storytelling perspective. So, why this case study, and why do I think? What are the lessons that I think can be taken from it? Offers the audience comfort of familiarity and the excitement of discovery. That juxtaposition is really at the core of what I wanted to discuss. Being able to present a story where people have an easier to pitch premise, where you can present the story to backers, to gatekeepers, with introduction that they're familiar with, is immensely important. Again, because we're talking about a world in which people have reduced engagement or diminished engagement, being able to start out with something that's familiar becomes increasingly valuable, not only for the gatekeepers, which can be seen with an easier to pitch appeal, not only in terms of the fact that around the world, and this is of course an overstatement, not everywhere in the world is familiar, not every single location in the world is familiar with the story, but a large portion of the world is familiar with stories about Snow White and has seen projects related to it. Obviously not the whole world, but also your audience becomes susceptible to noticing details that would otherwise be missed because you're telling the story within a framework, within a template that is familiar to them. They can now pick up on details that because of their level of engagement, they would otherwise miss. But since you're telling a landscape that they already know, distinctions, variations from that original framework become much more noticeable, or much more easily noticeable to the audience. And last but not least, the audience is emotionally connected to the characters, which again, much like their expectations in terms of factual events, you can just confirm or subvert that. You can play around with those expectations, as was done brilliantly in projects like Maleficent or Wicked, in which you present a specific perspective of the evil witch that we've all heard throughout our lives, or many of us have heard throughout our lives, and then you switch that around. You flip the expectation the audience has, and both of these have become staples of storytelling, Maleficent and Wicked, by doing exactly that, by telling the new perspective of that specific character. You can just also have fun with the existing elements and add a layer of entertainment, which was done with Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. You can subvert these classical pieces of literature such as Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies, which is somewhat more distant from the original, and you can sort of mesh factual elements with these fictional works that are in the public domain, as was done with Shakespeare in Love. So you took elements that were factual of what happened during that time. You took Shakespeare's works and included it in the story, and then you provided a lot of fictional elements of the romance, or even, depending on who you ask, the figure of Shakespeare and all those other elements, and combined all that into one story that could rely on emotional connection the audience had with the story. The moment you mention Romeo and Juliet, the audience knows how to react. The moment Ben Affleck in that film, the original title for Romeo and Juliet was Romeo and a completely other name, and the character played by Ben Affleck says maybe Romeo and Juliet would play better. And then you have a little bit of humor added to the story. And again, without having to explain anything to the audience, the benefit of economy. When you see certain connections between the story and Shakespeare's phenomenal plays, and I happen to be a huge admirer of Shakespeare. It's a field that I'm passionate about. But you can then play, and you can play for an audience member that has a passing knowledge of Shakespeare. You can play for an audience member that knows a lot about Shakespeare. And both of them can enjoy the story because, again, you're relying on information the audience already has. And ultimately, really, it's your idea. It's whatever you think is interesting. All that comes from whatever you're passionate about, whatever elements you think would be most interesting. I'm a little concerned with time. I just wanted to ask Kathleen, how are we doing on time?
So as far as I'm concerned, we're doing just fine on the time. You've been speaking for about 45 minutes, so it's up to you whether you want to carry on. I'm finding this really interesting. So
Okay.
It's up to you, and it's up to how your voice is holding it.
I'm doing fine for now. So I'll talk a little bit about one more example or one more category of examples, and then I'll open up for questions. So let me go back to the slides. There's a short film which I had discussed with Kathleen if perhaps playing it, and she would play it for you guys from her end. But I'm actually going to suggest that we, just for time, I think I can make my comments and we can leave it for the second half if there's interest from the audience to actually see the video, because there's always a break in the presentation when we stop to watch a video. So Morgan Cooper was an otherwise unknown filmmaker that in 2019 put up a video on YouTube, a short film essentially on YouTube, which posed the question of what would happen if Will Smith made The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air today. This video, which again, a link will be made available to you. It's on YouTube, so it's freely accessible. Led to the TV show Bel-Air that has been a success, deservingly so. And what I wanted to rely on is the fact that Morgan Cooper, the director, brilliantly relied on something called fair use, which basically allows you to use copyright protected material under very determined conditions. In Canada, that's referred to as fair dealing. There are differences between the institute, and there are always risks related to that use. But more than focusing on the legal aspects, I wanted to focus on the storytelling benefits of it. First, he made a story that's very contained. It's a 3.5 minute long clip. And the artistic achievements is, this is a drama. This is a story that is very dramatic in its delivery. There are certainly lighthearted moments in the trailer, but it is dramatic or at least I interpreted it as dramatic in essence. And that seems to be part of what Morgan Cooper was trying to achieve when he said, what would that story play like today? Now, I don't know the ages or the background of the audience members here, but I can say for somebody born roughly at my time, somebody who's roughly my age, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was a sitcom that sort of marked my childhood and marked my early youth. And it was very lighthearted. It had very poignant moments at time, but the show overall was very lighthearted. And in this clip that, again, will be made available to you, there's a moment early on in which the maternal character tells the story of, you're moving with your auntie and uncle to Bel-Air, which was a line in the opening credits of the original show, which again was delivered very lightheartedly in the opening credits. It was a playful element delivered in the opening credits. But in this dramatic piece that Morgan Cooper made, it's delivered with emotional weight. And then we see image of police violence. We see images of, and there's also a moment in the opening credits of the initial sitcom in which Will Smith says, that he got in a fight and his mom got scared. And he depicts what that fight looks like in a very dramatic sequence. All that is a subversion of expectations. And I say subversion as a positive. He played with our expectations because for a generation or for a few generations, we have very vividly when we hear, you're moving with your auntie and uncle in Bel Air, I'm remitted back to my childhood watching that sitcom, sitting back and watching it on TV with bright colors and Will Smith's charmingly delivering the theme song to that sitcom. But the images that are being presented to me are very violent images, very strong images, very socially relevant images. That juxtaposition becomes immensely powerful because you're playing with your audience's emotions. And again, I'm using this word playing, which could be seen as derogatory, and it's quite the opposite. It's artful, it's masterful when it's done correctly. And the result of that was this filmmaker, Morgan Cooper, who was otherwise a known filmmaker, made this video. It got 7 million views on YouTube alone, in addition to all the other platforms. Will Smith flew him out and they had meetings. They developed a show. The show was then sold to the Peacock streaming service network with a 2-season commitment, which is something that has, it is extremely rare. It's very rare in the business to have something called, direct to series, meaning that you already have a guarantee that you're going on the air. To have a 2-season commitment is, almost unheard of, not completely unheard of, but almost unheard of. And that's what happened in this specific case. And it's not just because this short film is very well done, which it is, but it's because he played with the emotions that existed in the audience. That work being done disassociated from any previously existing IP, from any previously existing intellectual property, wouldn't be as powerful. Not because, again, not as a derogatory comment on the filmmaker, but relying on emotions your audience already has allows you to have a deeper impact, particularly in a short form content, particularly when you only have a certain amount of time to make your point, which, although that is the case in this short film because of its overall length, that should always be the expectation of a storyteller, because again, economy is key. We're sort of interconnecting all these different benefits. So if last time I asked Kathleen, I was going on 45 minutes, I should be now going on 55 minutes. And I want to have time to answer questions and talk to everybody who's present. And because of that, I am going to wrap up now. But again, wrapping up to have a conversation with you guys and potentially ask or answer, I should say, any questions you might have.
That's great. That was a really exciting presentation, Bruno. So the discussion should be quite nice too. What I'm going to do is I'm going to invite each of you one at a time to unmute yourself if you wish and just ask your question verbally. So Elka, I'm going to, if I can figure out now how to do this. I think I have to go to the participants list. That's why. Okay, allowed to talk. If you'd rather not, just leave your mute on.
No, it's fine. Yeah, my concern with the question was, if you're making a movie, you're trying to do something with such a broad audience of every age, every part of the country, countries, cultures, with subtitles and all kinds of stuff. To pick things that are going to be culturally meaningful becomes very difficult.
So first, fantastic question. I would say that you're never going to capture everybody. Media nowadays, and this is, the longer we talk about this, the more things will come up. But with your comment, which I now understood perfectly, and actually rereading it, it was perfectly explained in your original question, but I read it while I was doing the presentation. So I think I gave you the wrong answer, or at least I answered the wrong question, which wasn't the question you were asking. I think nowadays, everyone is looking to a degree for specificity. Now, you're right that this is going to play, a TV show on Netflix is available for the entire world, essentially, if you have worldwide rights. But I would say that with the fragmented media landscape, no one's looking for a show that plays for everyone anymore, or at least that's not the overall objective. And I'm basing that on a progression that's happened in media. If you go back to the traditional sitcom, it had to be the broadest form of entertainment. So if you go back to, MASH or Cheers, the idea was anyone can come in and, watch this show, and it'll be, some people will love it, some people won't love it, but will be okay with it, but everybody will be entertained, because the whole idea is people are going to watch it on one TV set at home. So you're going to have different age groups. You're going to have, there are only so many networks. And what happened with time was a specialization of media. In the late 90s, early 2000s, you had an initial shift with HBO. HBO had a couple of very heavy hitters at that time, which were Sex and the City and The Sopranos. This is a broad and 6 Feet Under shortly thereafter. These are shows that aren't really watched by the same group of individuals. And of course, there's an overlap of cinema and television lovers, but the average, if you were going to describe the target audience for Sex and the City, that is not the same target audience, microscopic type target audience as The Sopranos. But for HBO, that's a good thing, because HBO is a subscriber-based platform and not a advertisement platform. So what you want at the end of the day is a show that a group of people, still a significant group, but you don't need everybody to like the show. You need a small group of people to like the show enough to choose to subscribe to HBO to have that show. And that's sort of where we've navigated, as the media business has navigated, in the sense that although it's great to have broad shows, and one of the last broad sitcoms was The Big Bang Theory, but even that started to be more specific in terms of nerd culture and everything else. But what people are looking for, and again, this is a generalization, is specific type of content. So you're right. There's no way to use a reference that everyone will understand. I do think some references are understood by the general audience. And again, you'll always lose somebody, but as long as you get a critical mass, you're okay. So I'm not sure I answered your question completely, but hopefully there was.
No, you did, which is exactly why I ended up with Disney. I would never, ever in my wildest dreams think I was going to subscribe to Disney, but I did. And it wasn't because of their Disney.
Yeah, it was some other show that that you really loved. So Dope Sick was a very interesting show starring Michael Keaton that was on Disney Plus. I can tell you,
was Better Call Saul, was that there?
Better Call Saul.
Yeah, and I think and Jeffrey, I have to have the list of what I'm watching on what, because there's so many of them, and that's exactly it. I got sucked into all of them, but for very specific things. Yeah.
Exactly. And probably if you could set up your own platform, if you could say, I want one show from Netflix, I want 2 shows from Disney Plus, I want 1 show from Amazon Prime, that would probably be ideal for you. And the platforms know that. So if you're able to pitch a show for, any of these platforms, where they're looking for is a quadrant that they haven't covered. They're looking for something that will bring in new viewers, or that a small group of viewers that they already have that might be thinking, you know what, I have 4 subscription services. I don't really need 4 subscription services. I'm going to stop subscribing to one of them. That they're going to stay with Netflix, Amazon Prime, or Disney Plus because of those services. So to your point, Disney Plus has these tentpole, which are, Marvel, Star Wars, which get the masses going there. And then I'm very honest, and if there are any super fans here, they might want to kill me after this comment. That's not what drives me. I enjoy those films; they're great. I'm not making a Martin Scorsese comment, because I'm not Martin Scorsese, and therefore I can't get away with it. Who said those films aren't cinema? Nothing to that extent. But there are other shows, Better Call Saul, and others, those are the ones I really want to watch. And if there's a platform that has them, I'm going to that specific platform, and within reason, I don't really care about anything else that's on that platform. So I completely agree with your comments.
Okay, thank you, Elka. Avner, you've asked a couple of questions. I'm going to ask you if you could right now limit yourself to talking about your questions about being politically correct. So if you'd like to speak, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll speak.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It's an interesting question because I deal with people both in Hollywood and in publishers' role. When I was in writing school, the stories, they all say are very nice, none got published. And the ones that said, you can't say things like that, bang, 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 published and won awards. You can just Google me and see. The question is this: there's a big hole in the market, it's glaring everybody in the face. And you talk to people who produce shows, to go to publishers, and they know in their heart that if you address the people who are the Polyver viewers, the Trump audience, intelligently, by mocking the other side in a very competent, professional way, the first result, you'll never have lunch with your friends again. But the second, you may make $1 billion. Rupert Murdoch make $1 billion by serving the underserved market. So my question is, Hollywood now is firing people, and publishers' roles are firing people, and there are things that can be done, perhaps, I'm saying perhaps, by creating characters, perhaps in cartoon format, because cartoon characters can get away with things that real people cannot, because they will never have lunch in this town again. You can have Homer Simpson, you can have South Park. So my question is, are there any places that try to specialize in the underserved market because they just may make the next billion? Instead of serving all this declining business, because the media business is like the beer business, growing 1 or 2% per year, and it's ho-hum. They're all serving in a crowded market. End of question.
Sorry if it seemed like I cut you off. I just saw you pause for a second. So if I did cut you off, I apologize.
Okay.
Addressing without addressing the specifics of your question, because I think that's a question of whether that specific audience you're addressing is large enough, or how we qualify that audience. Sidestepping that, I think looking for an underserved audience is what everyone should be doing. So in a moment in which, and again, not getting into the discussion of PC or not PC, but 2 points I want to make. First, looking for an underserved audience is absolutely what any writer, and you mentioned you're accomplished, so this might not apply to you as somebody who already has a fan base. But what I would say for a writer that doesn't have a fan base, that doesn't have a following, would be absolutely search for the audience that is underserved. Obviously, don't be, and you were not suggesting that in any way, shape, or form, but obviously don't be artificial. Find an audience that reflects a story that you to some degree agree with, even if there are variations within what you and your audience believe in, but that you have common ground with them. Certainly address that. But to the larger point, yes, look for audiences, bring your points of view that are different, that are unique. And the second point, what you said is really a question of whether animated characters, and I would, if you allow me, I would broaden that to any absurd character. Can any character that's more detached from reality have a position that might be more off-center from what the central politics are? Absolutely. I think the more detached a character is, and we see that even in very structured shows. So you always have the wacky neighbor or the wacky character, even in very traditional sitcoms, and that person can have views and opinions that are not mainstream. So if you go back to Kramer on Seinfeld, or Neil Patrick Harris's character on How I Met Your Mother, and go throughout the history of sitcoms, the history of TV shows, the off-center characters are able to say and expose views that aren't mainstream. That certainly is further elevated when we talk about animated characters. With animated characters, because we're not seeing an actual person say that, whatever the Kramer effect on Seinfeld is, that's elevated exponentially. I feel like you want to say something and I've cut you off. I might be wrong. Yep.
Andrew, do you want to add to that?
Am I still on?
Yes, you're
Okay.
still on.
No, usually you say personnel is policy. I'm not sure the existing scriptwriter, the existing people in the industry will even let this point sink in. An old French rule is that the human mind is unable, not unwilling, but physically unable to let in words that prove that the brain owner is or has been an idiot. So in many cases, the not wacky character that seems to be, that provide the viewer an escape hatch, but contrary, a place in which the character who says the thing that you don't want to say, here's the main characters that the other are wacky. Look at Spike Lee in Jungle Fever. He had characters called Wannabe and Jigaboos, and he basically addressed the point black audience don't want to hear, that the fair-skinned blacks are discriminating against the darker-skinned blacks. Instead of being an anti-racist movie against white, it was an anti-racist movie against blacks. So in effect, he was working against his own convictions. So a writer that worked against his own conviction and tried to prove himself wrong will create in himself such an agitation that it will transmit itself to the audience. And the writers usually who do things that try to prove themselves right create handmaiden tale. Now, I would like to have the money, but this is not what really creates big legacies and big characters. You try to work against your main belief. And it's difficult to talk with the people in the industry itself because they don't allow them to see the point.
Your voice is breaking up a bit.
But I see the existing groove, but I haven't yet seen people who try, even commercially speaking, go into a new groove. But I'm sure it'll come. I'm sure it'll come.
I think, and I respectfully disagree with some of the points in terms of some of the issues, but I think the larger issue here is whether or not a storyteller can say opinions that are unpopular opinions, or to your initial point in this segment was, can you say something that challenges the audience, that basically tells the audience that their convictions are incorrect? And I would say that you're regardless, and again, sidestepping whether or not the substance of it, because I think there's a bigger point, which is, can you do that regardless of whether we agree or disagree on what is correct or incorrect?
Right.
The point is, I think in a fractured media landscape, there is that room. Now, I hear you in the sense that I can imagine that if you're trying to tell a story that doesn't resonate with a mainstream narrative, you might have pushback from specific buyers, and that can certainly happen. However, what I would say is there are fields that allow anyone to. We live in a time where you can create a podcast, where you can create direct to fan content. And by doing that, once you have a fan base or once you have a following, I think there are relatively straightforward ways to monetize that audience. So I take your point, and I do think no one it's part of human nature feels 100% comfortable having their beliefs challenges, whether those beliefs are correct or incorrect. I also think that in broadly speaking, part of the artistic endeavor is to challenge people. Again, broadly speaking. And I also agree that there is a institutional, there's a tendency throughout history to stick to whatever the mainstream opinion is. Having said all that, I don't think that there isn't room to express any view within reason. We're not talking about fringe views, which I'm sure are not being espoused here. But I think it really connects to what I was talking to Elke about, which is because everyone is looking for, Elke is going to subscribe to Disney Plus that has 1 million hours of content because she wants to watch one specific show. And I do the same thing. I think every platform is looking for that specific show for 1,000 people. If there are 1,000 people that really want that specific type of content, again, within certain boundaries, I think there's quite a bit of room for that. So that would be my answer, specifically addressing that point.
Okay, thank you. That's a very complete answer. It dawned on me while you were talking, Bruno, that the Archie Bunker show, my understanding is that that was originally written, All in the Family, as a mockery of the type of beliefs that Archie was espousing.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
The writer's chagrin, it turned out to be popular among all the people who were Archie Bunkers.
But however long it's been since that show, nowadays it's referenced as I don't know if satirical, but certainly, Norman Lear, who created that show, had done that quite a bit. And Norman Lear is an example, has more storytelling ability in his, left pinky than I will ever have in my entire body, but he's still creating stories. And you're absolutely right. It's, showing a character, and some people saw that character and said, I want to be like him. And some people saw that character and were in on the joke. And some people saw that character and saw a character they didn't necessarily like or relate to. And that's part of art. Art, it's an overused phrase, but art is in the eye of the beholder. Once it's out there, everyone will have their interpretation to it. But yes, I think Norman Lear, I know Norman Lear has said quite a few times that character in All in the Family was, he wanted to show the absurdity of that character's views. He didn't want to celebrate those views, but they were, understood as, and that happens quite a bit. Norman Jewison, a very well-known Canadian director who did a Future Sport, the James Caan film about a super violent futuristic sport, which was done to criticize violence in society and was celebrated as, this is so cool because there's, people's heads are being chopped off. So yes, at times the wrong element, the wrong message resonates with audiences, but absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Let me move on now temporarily. Let me move on to Liz Blight. Liz, you've asked a question about the risks that the Bel Air creator was taking. And I'll invite you to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak.
Hi. Well, I don't have much more to say than my question. But so that fellow did his YouTube or whatever it was. The new version, and everything was great because Will Smith liked it and everybody else liked it. What if Will Smith didn't like it? Like, he used that character, Will Smith's character, a character developed by somebody else. Would he have been liable or have set himself up for any kind of, retribution or however you want to call it?
So great question. So like most legal questions, it depends. It's complicated. But I'll try to give you the summarized answer, which again should not be taken as legal advice on what you do, but just general comments on the matter. So basically, there's something called fair use in the United States, which basically allows you to use copyright protected content under certain conditions. And there are basically 4 factors that are used to analyze if something is fair use or not. It's the character and purpose of the use, the nature of the work, the amount and substantiality, and the effect upon the market for. Basically, the first one is, did you do something transformative with the work? Did you change the character and purpose of the original? Second factor, the nature of the work is, was that original work very creative? If so, it's highly protected by copyright. And as a result, less eligible for fair use. If it's not highly creative, it's less protected by copyright and less eligible for fair use. The amount and substantiality, how much did you use? Did you use a lot of it, or did you just use a little bit? And last but not least, the fourth factor is the effect upon the market for value of. Did you affect the market, either the value or the demand for that work in the marketplace, the original work? So without getting too technical, he was protected by fair use. He had this defense. If Will Smith or whoever owns the rights to the original show didn't like his take, he could have said this is fair use. Now, is that a solid defense that there would be no counter argument to it? Is there a risk? Yes. Fair use is always there's always an element of risk in fair use because it's up to interpretation. It's not as specific as when something goes into the public domain. You can calculate the amount of time the work has existed, and then it goes into the public domain. Fair use, basically, and this is an oversimplification, if we were having a legal discussion, a specialist could provide a much more thorough explanation, but in broad general terms, the judge can decide whatever they feel is fair within the parameters of those four factors. They need to stick to those four factors, and they need to consider case law. But basically, I would say there's definitely a degree of risk. But he did have a defense, but there's always a degree of risk. Another example of somebody who used fair use, and now not in a YouTube video, but on a episode of a show. There's an episode called, there's a show called Master of None on Netflix, made by the comedian Aziz Ansari. And there's an episode in season 1 of that show, and this is the title of basically they're portraying Indian culture as it is portrayed on television. And the character, this is a somewhat, not autobiographical, but clearly there are elements of Aziz Ansari's real life that are in this show. And there's a specific episode when a younger version of Aziz Ansari is watching television. And what we have is the young Aziz Ansari watching television circa early 90s. And every time we hear the channel changing and we cut back to the young Aziz Ansari watching TV, there's a stereotypical depiction of Indian culture, whether it's Apu from The Simpsons, whether it's a film called Short Circuit, in which a Caucasian actor is essentially is playing either an Indian character or a character of Indian descent. There's Mike Myers in the film The Guru of Love, and a number of other depictions that would certainly be stereotypical depictions of Indian culture. In that episode, there's an interview with the co-creator of that show called Alan Yang, who he said, in which he says that they relied on fair use to use those clips of, The Simpsons, Short Circuit, the Mike Myers movie, and so on and so forth. And he said, our lawyer thought it was fair use, and so far, knock on wood, we haven't been sued. And that's sort of a good explanation. You'll consult a lawyer. You'll make sure that you have good arguments to say that the use is fair, and therefore you are covered by fair use. Again, in Canada, there's something called fair dealing, which is of the same nature, but a little different. But is there a risk involved? Yes, there's a risk involved. So to your point, again, it's a complicated answer, but could this person have been sued? I'm sure somebody could have come up with an argument to say that it wasn't fair use and had gone after it. So there's a degree of risk that's inherent to fair use or fair dealing. I wish I could give you like a very straightforward answer, Liz, but that's the best I can do.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay. I just want to acknowledge another point that Avner made, and I've accidentally moved it to the answered list, so I'll just point it out. Avner says, if I may use an analogy, assume that half the market for toothpaste is people who want mint taste, but nobody produces it because of a psychological or religious political reluctance. Then comes Murdoch and makes $1 billion selling mint toothpaste. Perhaps that's why Hollywood is firing people today, and the big 5 of publishers now is shedding people. It's a comment. It's up to you, Bruno, whether you want to respond to that. I think it's offered as a comment.
And I because I can't read it unless you can bring it back. And again, I want to make it clear, it wasn't. I'm not criticizing the way it was worded, but having it read back, I think I missed some detail of it, and I think Avner and I had a good exchange. Unless, so I think it's generally been answered.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you something myself, Bruno, in fact, and that is, my husband and I watched your movie. You're one of the executive producers on The Sounding. And I thought it was a really rich experience, very fresh. I mean, I knew what you were going to talk about today, so I was kind of second guessing how what you were going to say today would have applied to The Sounding. But even then, I thought, it doesn't really tip me off to anything. I was engaged in the whole story right to the end without trying to figure out what happens,
So I mean, it's a film I'm very proud of. I take no credit for it in the sense that it's a creation of Catherine Eaton and Brian, her co-writer in the film, and she's the director, writer, and star of the film. It has an incredible cast of a lot of very experienced television actors, a lot of Broadway people that have won Tonys and have an incredible career behind them. And it's a very interesting film about the premise of the film. It's always a hard film to pitch, but it's a woman that doesn't speak, grown woman who doesn't speak and has never spoken. And after a traumatic experience, she starts to speak through Shakespeare quotes. That's the only way she communicates, is quoting Shakespeare. And a well-intentioned doctor commits her to a mental institution, and the story progresses from there. It's a metaphor of, and that's my interpretation. You'd have to ask Catherine her own. I don't want to speak for her, but we've had several conversations about the film. About using your own voice and anybody, but particularly a woman's ability to speak or not speak in the manner that she intends. And it's a film that still gets to me. There's a quote at the end of the film that's delivered through a voiceover from Harris Yulin from The Tempest, which I love. And there are many elements of that film that I love. It's a film that should get more attention, not in any way, shape, or form because I executive produced it, but because it's a really special film that was a labor of love for all those involved, and that very much includes Catherine, Brian, Caitlin Gold, who's a fellow producer on the film, Jessica Vale, who's also a producer in the film, and we did a long circuit with that film. It sold to HBO on a number of territories. It's a film I'm very proud of, in the sense that a lot of times I'm involved with projects that are, it's the business side of it. That's a project that I adore the story. I think it's an important film. I think it's truly, artwork in the truest sense of the word. It's open to interpretation. People take different things from the film. Watching it with theatrical audiences is always interesting because people laugh at moments you don't expect them to laugh. They sort of gasp or have emotional reactions in different moments. And that's been an interesting experience with that specific film. So it's a film I really like, and honestly, the type of film that I'd like to do more of. Again, it's a very artistic film, a very different film. So it's not the easiest type of film, but to your point, it has this element of relying on previously existing IP. For lovers of Shakespeare, they have one relationship with the film. Those who don't know Shakespeare very much also have a connection, because Shakespeare is sort of, even if if you're not if that isn't your cup of tea, I'm sure you've heard of, not you personally, Kathleen, of course, but whoever this audience member is, I'm sure you've heard of Romeo and Juliet. I'm sure you've you have some passing knowledge of what that story is. I'm sure you've heard Shakespeare be recited in some venue, even if it didn't capture your attention. So it was interesting to play with that. Absolutely.
And most of the quotes from Shakespeare were accessible on their own merit anyway.
Yeah, it's the beauty of Shakespeare when it's well delivered. It's something I learned, which is Shakespeare, whoever he was, which is a whole other mystery, which I adore to discuss, but perhaps a discussion for another time. It was a playwright. It was, I don't mean to say that it wasn't meant to be read, but it was meant to be performed. And I think that eases the access to Shakespeare. I think when you have great actors who know Shakespeare, delivering Shakespeare, it becomes more digestible for the audience at large. And yes, the specific quote. So even when the film was being released internationally, there was a discussion: do we want to have subtitles already included or closed captioning already included so the audience can follow along? Because it is a little bit more difficult at times to understand, particularly for international audience, non-English speaking audiences that might be able to follow a film that's in English in general, but when you're adding Shakespeare to it, it might be too much for them. So that's a discussion we had at the time, and I genuinely forget what we decided, but at the time of release, because it's been a minute. But very talented people in the film. Again, Catherine and Brian wrote a beautiful script and made a beautiful film that was it is something I'm very proud of. Again, not being able to take any credit for it, but being very proud of it nevertheless.
So I'd like to share a little tiny joke from it, and then I have a bigger question for you.
Okay.
When there's a scene in the psychiatric ward where our main character is lying on the bed, and then there's two other patients sitting together on the next bed watching her, and the idea is that our character is the newbie on the ward, and so they're curious to know who this newbie is that's joined them. So one of them says to the other one, one of them says to the newbie, "Nurse Ratched has just left." And that's just left hanging. And I thought that's so effective as a joke, because most of us know who Nurse Ratched is, and it kind of creates a sense of community that we're watching this together as a community, and we get it, and then we can carry on. And there's no follow-up to that. I mean, it's just a toss-off line. I thought it was really effective.
And that those are little nuggets. Both Catherine and Brian teach at or at least they still do teach at storytelling at different screenwriting courses at Harvard University, making sure your audience feels in on the joke. It's immensely important to be able to do that. It's immensely important to make sure your audience understands certain aspects of they feel like they're in on the joke, and that you're telling the story that was meant for them. Particularly in a tiny film like this, you want it to feel like a discovery. You want it to feel like the film appeals to you and your friends and people you've met in life. None of us nowadays, I mean, some of us clearly do, because the most successful films are Marvel films that everybody watches. But the type of audience that would have watched The Sounding and is an audience that wants to feel like the film is made for them, the film that was made, whatever they identify as them, if that's a specific social group, if that's a specific age group, so having these references helps the film along. And there are a few of them spread out along the film. There's there's a book that Liv, the character, picks up when at the end of the tail end of the film, where she has all those books inside the medical institution. And I've heard people react to some of the titles of those books because it connects, and they feel, well, I've read that. So having those little Easter eggs, if you will, for the audience member feels like you're in on the story. So I'm glad that hit you in that way, because that was certainly the intention of the overall film. Yeah.
Now, my bigger question. You're listed in the credits in the sounding as an executive producer. And if you could maybe give us the capsule explanation, what a producer does, what an executive producer does, how many are there, and perhaps a little bit about what your role was.
So an executive producer or a producer, no one can define that appropriately. I would say a producer is the person, a producer can be defined a little better. A producer is the person who's really in charge of the film getting made and getting made under the conditions and within the structure it was promised. So that's really what you're delivering at the end of the day. The producer is where the project is birthed as a project. So you might have a screenwriter that wrote a screenplay, but the producer is who is going to option that screenplay. In theory, the producer is going to be the person who's going to select the director for the film. The producer is going to make sure during production, the producer is going to raise money for the film. During the production, the producer is going to, the captain of the ship during production is the director, but the producer's job should be to make sure things are going as planned. He, she, or they shouldn't overstep. They shouldn't, take over the production. That's a recipe for disaster. But they should make sure that things aren't going horribly wrong. And if things are going horribly wrong, they should step in. If not, they should be a sounding board. They should be a collaborator, somebody who's there to support the director. And ultimately, then they need to help release the film, which is also under the purview of the producer. An executive producer is very ill-defined in the sense that an executive producer can mean a multitude of things. My participation in the sounding was I came in later, became very involved in all aspects in the later stages of the film. And there were, well, 3 lead producers, considering Catherine as well, but a fantastic producer called Caitlin Gold, another fantastic producer called Jessica Vale. I forget if Brian, the screenwriter, is billed as a producer, but he's certainly a de facto producer. And that was, what I saw my position as well, was coming in and helping with everything I could. It was a film, I had just made my switch from law to film. And my conversation was really, listen, I want to do everything I can from the business side to, literally looking at, when we were releasing the film, looking for Shakespeare groups close to where we were going to screen the film to see if they wanted to promote the film. So when we did our wrap party, Catherine was kind enough to say, executive producers can mean a lot of different things. But Bruno really helped along the way. So executive producer is an ill-defined position. It can mean somebody, traditionally it's a position that sort of exists separately from the producers, in the sense that you have the producers, you have a co-producer, which is below producer, and below that you have an associate producer. So that would be the hierarchy of producers. You have producer, co-producer, and associate producer. Executive producer exists somewhere over here. So it's a weird segment, and that can be in larger films. You'll have, and in no way am I comparing myself to him, and it would be ridiculous if I did, but you can have somebody like Brad Pitt, who's an executive producer, and I cannot speak for Mr. Pitt, but it can be something as simple as he's the person who's going to make a phone call if there's a problem. He's the person who's going to sell the film because he has that influence. Or it can be somebody who's involved in the film. So the executive producer can mean a multitude of things in the production. In my case, it was really helping the rest of the team with everything and trying to push the film uphill, which again was a relatively easy job because it's a great film and a film I'm very proud of.
It is a great film. It is a great film, and it's also beautiful, physically beautiful to watch, the aesthetics of it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
At this point, Bruno, I'd like to say, on behalf of Toronto Mensa, thank you very much for this really elaborated and rich presentation. I have learned an awful lot today, and I think that some of the other people here have also learned a great deal today. I really enjoyed it. So thank you, and I'd like to let you know that a little gift will be on its way to you as a sign of our appreciation.
First, thank you very much for the gift. That was unexpected, but I'm always happy to get gifts. It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you, those of you who asked questions. All of the questions were immensely insightful, and I appreciated them. The one final comment is I do think storytelling can serve various purposes. And hopefully there's some nuggets of information throughout today's presentation. So it's been a pleasure.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who came. It was great to have you. Whether you participated in the discussion or not, it was great to have you here with us. So we'll end now and say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.